Why is the statement, "Don't have kids if you can't afford them," problematic? If it's a word of warning to future parents, then that's fine. If it's in response to someone who already has kids, then it strikes me as unhelpful and insensitive. They've found themselves in a tough situation and you're just rubbing the salt in. As a warning to a too young couple that's starry-eyed about Bluebird tweeting babies? No problem. Maybe not as a stranger or random acquaintance. But coming from an older, respected friend or relative, it's good advice. Pointing at an overworked young mother trying to make ends meet with a minimum wage job and saying that? Problematic. Depending on the country you are in, sex ed is barely existing. Religious nutjobs control the access to contraception. And politics have worked for centuries to keep the poor and breeding new workers. Saying that in this situation is arrogant and ignorant. That statement fails to account for the many people who suddenly become poor after having kids for various reasons, such as injury, disability, getting laid off, divorce, etc. An additional point to what others have said. Statements tend not to exist in a vacuum. Sentiments like this are often used to justify policy suggestions which have further problems. Don't be born if your parents can't afford it isn't advice that anyone can take. But these policies often have a similar effect. I personally agree with that statement. I think it's cruel to have a kid you can't afford to give a happy childhood. But if it gets used to say something like, "If you are poor, you shouldn't be allowed to reproduce," it sounds a lot like eugenics. Especially if it's in a country where one ethnic group is much richer than the rest. I think people think it would mean only rich people would have kids. But agreeing with you, BC, it makes sense if you can't provide basic necessities to take care of them. Then maybe you shouldn't have one? Few problems I see. Assuming you are posting from a U.S. perspective. First is that in a properly functioning Western society, the vast majority of people should be sufficiently well off enough to support 1 to 2 children. The U.S. has an abnormally high poverty rate for a Western superpower. It also does not have the appropriate social support systems in place like Finland to support families. Second, being able to afford a child is very vaguely defined. Depending on how much you want to spend on their upbringing, it's not clear at all where to draw the line. Third, accidents happen, and the U.S. is not so friendly towards abortions. Fourth, for some people kids are a bit of an insurance policy in case something unexpected happens as they age and need unforeseen financial support. Last and worst of all, you are putting a price on human life. In a purely capitalistic society, that is par for the course. But from a moral, human standpoint, that's an ass thing to do. Context collapse. People will naturally frame your comment to fit their situation and sentiment. Regardless of your intent, they plug your comment into the same context of a million other comments and criticisms they perceive. Let's say you read the following 3 statements. 1. Start planning early for retirement. 2. Develop a stable career path. 3. Don't have kids if you can't afford them. That's context A. How about something for context B? 1. Don't eat so much if you don't want to be so fat. 2. Stop being lazy and work harder if you want a better job. 3. Don't have kids if you can't afford them. I guarantee everyone's emotional reactions to the original statement will be different if they read the different groups of statements. Everyone here came from somewhere else and saw different statements first, in addition to whatever different life circumstances people find themselves in. That's my theory anyways. I think a lot of the time when people say this they generally mean, don't have kids if you can afford to give them financial privilege. which is in fact entirely different to don't have kids. If you can afford to feed, house, clothe, etc. them. One is soiled advice. Obviously being able to actually afford to keep them alive is seriously import. One is pretentious and unnecessary, because it puts all of the focus on the individual while ignoring the societal forces that make it so goddamn expensive to live and raise children. One child in daycare costs more than my mortgage payment. Because it sounds like people who suck at playing this capitalist game aren't human enough to warrant basic pleasure or family. Because it's usually reserved for those who already have the kids, not non-pregnant couples. I assume. I don't find it so. But I also don't have kids. I'd die for a baby. But I don't feel financially free enough to enjoy motherhood, so I'm not going to have a baby. Until who knows? You will never be able to afford them. I'm the same way when it comes to pets. So many people neglect their pets because they don't have money. People take it as a personal insult. If you say you shouldn't have kids if you can't afford them and they know they can't afford them, they feel like you're telling them they're not good enough to have kids. I agree though. I hold the same position, but it's not necessarily about affording kids. It's about responsibility. Don't have kids if you don't fully know or understand the commitment it entails. It's a big decision and it's also long-term. You don't get to change your mind halfway through. It depends what you mean by can't afford them. Some people think that statement means can't afford to house and feed them. For others it means can't afford to buy them iPads. I would balk at the statement instinctively. If I search my feelings to figure out why I find this so offensive, I come up with because having children and a family shouldn't be something only the middle classes and above get to have. What is the cutoff? You know? How much is enough money? 'Cause a child is going to be a financial burden no matter how much money you have. It's fine as general advice to people thinking about having kids, but it's no use as a public policy argument, and it's frankly dangerous when politicians use rhetoric like that to justify arguing against policies designed to lift children out of poverty. Once the child exists, the rights or wrongs of the decision to have children are irrelevant. The child deserves to have a decent life. Basically, it's people who have had good luck, pretending bad luck doesn't exist.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.